All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first one that I've participated, Roundtable of LCS Media here. After this season's LCS 2023 All-Pro voting, it felt pretty contentious. So I wanted to make sure that the fans at home that felt very strongly about the credentials and the reasoning and all of the things about the votes that were put out got to see a little bit of the back end, because these are the guys that have been covering League as long, if not longer, than I have, and in the multiple roles that I've been, and have been gracious enough to teach me and have fantastic examples of what great work looks like in multiple different forms and multiple different formats. So with that said, we're here to kind of chat about this year's All-Pro voting, since there were some interesting votes. The request was put out to everyone in the press. Some people weren't able to make it. They said they wanted to. They weren't and didn't. And some people just didn't respond, which is fine as well, because they're probably prepping for a show in Raleigh. So let's get into it as I introduce everyone. I'm Degon. I host and cast and do a lot of things that people know me from. In the top left corner of my screen, we have Jay Silver from Jay Silver Presents. He's generally known, he's actually has the consecutive streak for longest first questions in a press conference. It's still running right now for the LCS. Next up, we have David Shynock. You might know him from TikTok every now and then. He's the big proponent for getting more esports out in the East Coast, and instead, he actually got one of the biggest orgs out of the East Coast. So, just kidding. That's not David's. That David didn't do that by himself, but David has definitely been pushing on the TikTok front, and actually, I think has been revolutionizing the way that we consume content. Next up, down in the middle left-hand corner, I have Feisal Merali, part of the Click GG. Feisal generally asks the best questions out of everyone in press conferences. Sorry, Jay. Jay asked the first, Feisal asked the best. Next up, we have Nicholas James from win.gg, generally in some sort of fancy jacket, clothing, apparel when we go in live in person. Next up, I like to call him the Godfather of the LCS media. It's Nick Geracie, who is basically written for every outlet under the sun, currently writing for Red Bull, and also can shred your face off on any guitar made to man. Next up, we have Sage Datuin, my Filipino brother over at Esports Illustrated. Sage has the best... what was it? Sage has the best reactions that are... What Nick, help me with it. What am I thinking of? Sage has the best straight face. He'll say things that are actually the most hilarious. Straight face, you won't even know that the punch is coming. And then down the bottom corner with the Pikachu is Tim Lee, freelance content creator, who did not vote this time, but generally has been around covering the LCS for a long time. Welcome, guys, and thank you for putting up with my crappy introductions. Let's get into it, because I don't want to hear how bad you think my introductions were. Jay, let's start with you over at the top. The purpose of this whole roundtable was to not necessarily hit on the votes that we thought were pretty obvious, but more about hitting on the votes that you felt were contentious. So let's start with your ballot, where you felt like maybe you had some contentious votes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for bringing this all together. One of the things I always talk to other creators about is making sure that the media is heard. As someone who comes from traditional political journalism, where media is in your face all the time, I feel like in esports necessarily, it's always there, but people are not as sure about it. So I really appreciate you getting this together. Where was I controversial? Every year I end up doing a more holistic approach. I don't have that last week bias. I really try to look at the season overall as a whole. So if someone had a killer week 9, which I feel like the MVP votes is one of my more contentious votes, and I'll get into that in a second. I look at things holistically. Who impacted the team? Impact. We'll get to him at some point. Who impacted their roster the most? What did they contribute to the ecosystem of the individual lane? And overall, just the scope of esports in general. So there are two that really got a little bit of question mark pings for. Number one, including Luger over a AD carry such as Stixay, AD carries such as Double Lift. I put Luger in my third pro. Luger to me was an individual that really stood out overall. I wanted to give a lot of honors to CLG for the way that they were able to win some of their games, be a consistent team when they had those bright moments. But perhaps probably my biggest is I did not vote Berserker at all in my MVP. I voted Fudge, Prince, and River. Like I said, I looked at things more on a holistic approach. And I feel like without those three players, and with Cloud9, you can make an exception because every member of their team did receive some nod in All Pro voting. But I really wanted to give Fudge a lot of credit for stepping up tremendously from the last few years. And I did an interview with him, I think week 6, week 7, and we talked about that fundamentals. And don't remember exactly the way he put it, but he basically explained how he was becoming that internal voice. And I really wanted to honor him by giving him by giving him the MVP. I know he was eliminated from the top 3, but that's just where I ended up.
So, couple things here. I think the big one that we'll probably discuss the most, Luger. Luger being included as the player for CLG, whether it could have been Palafox or Dokla or someone else, I think is one. The other one is one that you didn't bring up. Jay, you voted Jojo Pune as your mid-second team All-Pro. I think that's one that can be pushed here. So any of the other guys want to go ahead and jump in on a couple of these votes here?
So just on anyone's vote or just like Jay specifically?
Jay's to start. Jay's to start.
I think Luger is probably the biggest question mark for me. I saw him as a split as kind of like the median. Like if AD carry was above him, he was like the upper half of the league. If they're below him, they're lower half of the league. I didn't really see him as like anything spectacular this year. He hasn't really lived up to the hype that he had from 100 Next or 100 Academy coming into the LCS yet, to my opinion. And he was just kind of middling this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I'll incorporate the Jojo Pion and Luger because I have the similar argument for both of them. There are often games that pivoted on, or I should reverse with the mid lane pick, responding to Digon. I had a hard time with the mid lane, I will be honest. I wasn't sure about MNS because I think someone on the dive, I think it was Jad who made the point. I felt like he didn't have enough games under his belt in the LCS for me to appropriately vote for him. And David, I think you and I talked about this, or no.
Yeah.
I voted. We were talking about this in the pre-show that I did with some of the NA people, and I did ask the question: would MNS make a spot? And I was surprised that he did. I was very happy that he did. For me, like I said, mid lane was very difficult. I thought in terms for Jojo Pion, and similar to Luger, when EG and when CLG won games, it was off of those two individuals. I felt like Luger had some very standout performances. One that stood out to me was their upset win in week 9, game 3, which is why when I solidified my vote in the AD carry position, where Luger just popped off and was able to dumpster Cloud9, dumpster Berserker. And in regards to Jojo Pion, I know the last week, I do not want to fault him. COVID really does do a lot. Someone who's had it before, it really does impact your ability to basically do anything. But there were moments where I was very happy with how Jojo played, and I wanted to give him some kind of recognition.
Okay. David, go ahead. I want you to get in here next in terms of both your votes and kind of responding to the platform that we've now laid down by Jay.
So I got a question for everybody based on this. Is 10 games, including the tiebreaker, enough to qualify you for All-Pro? If your answer is no, did you agree with Core JJ getting it on the basis of 11 games? for those that I don't know what everybody voted for, whether you have M&S on your list or not. So I'm curious to know people's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I will say, as one of the people who did vote for Core JJ last split, um, due to the visa issues, um, I would. It was very difficult for me for M&S. It was one I was kind of going back and forth on for a long time. Um, I really did want to include M&S, and in the summer, I will definitely keep him for a lot of the accolades. For something like, I know the FPX most valued or most improved player, I may consider M&S because of that toxicity that he had, quote unquote toxicity with Core JJ. And that was also a very difficult one. For similar reasons, I had to give him some kind of accolade in this, because he was able the way that he was able to kind of transform Team Liquid when they had that slump in the beginning of 2022, and then were able to propel them to um, propel them to that top standard that we're used to seeing from them. But that's just my opinion.
Sure.
I think
Let's get someone else in here. Nick, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just on the topic of M&S, I think it's really, really difficult because we had a kind of a weird mid lane pool this spring. I feel like I think that we had obviously I'm glad that Gory got the All Pro. I think that he did very well, even though he played 2 less games than every other starter. But I think it was also because we had guys like Vikla, who was very, very hot to start the split alongside Prince, kind of cool off a little bit, and then there were some people I thought who were actually pretty strong, but maybe were on good enough teams. I thought I had Maple actually as my third mid laner, and I thought that he actually quietly had a very good split on a team that otherwise didn't have a huge win condition. And in the case of M&S, I think it's the 9 games. I don't think that should exclude him from eligibility. But you think it has to play a part, right? Like you could cherry pick 9 games from an 18-game season of a couple other players and find something similar. He had extremely high highs, but he also, even in the games where C9 won in week 8, he did not look fantastic. And I do think that I think pound for pound in the second half, he has the most skill. He had the most skill expression of any mid laner, and I think that if he was here for a whole split, this is a very different conversation. I would be shocked if he wasn't in one of the 3 All-Pro spots in summer, just given what he's shown so far. But that was my personal methodology of I didn't feel like it was enough to put him over some of the other people. Yeah.
Nick, how did you feel about 10 games being enough?
I mean, like I said, I expected if he was going to make it, I expected it to be third, just because I thought the 10 games would be enough to dissuade people. But I was also really not a huge fan of a few years ago when Spence Garen won the MVP playing 13 or 18 games, right? Blabber played almost a third of the season for him. So I think that maybe I put a bit more stock into that. It's hard to say. Also, teams always talk about how best of ones don't really matter and how mercurial those can be based on just the results. And so I totally respect if people saw the overall form M&S was able to show and felt like that was greater. Again, I didn't feel like we had a ton of mid laners who were stellar throughout the whole split, so I think it really was open. If you looked at the total mid lane votes, there were a lot less than Fudge was in first place for top laners with 120 something votes, and then Gory was first place mid lane with 75 votes or something like that. It was very clearly a lot more of a contentious role voting, and I think it just comes down to what you value more and how much stock you put into the fact that he really only played half a season plus 1 tiebreaker.
Get in there, Tim. I saw you pipe up real quick.
I think I have an apt comparison for this. It's kind of like baseball, where if a rookie comes in halfway through the season or even before the season, no one really has a scouting report on them. I know he comes in halfway through the season, he kind of has an 80% win rate, does super well, but he doesn't have the impact that I feel like a lot of teams need their carry player to have. As far as I had for a vote, he kind of missed the mark for me. Like Nick said, if he did, he would have made the 3rd team. For me, he was just outside of it, because I really did feel yes, the win rate's impressive. Yes, there's a lot of kill participation. Even though, in my opinion, he doesn't do a lot of damage in the games that he does really well in. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It just really didn't feel like the impact for me was felt. I had a couple other people that had, in my opinion, a little bit better of a season. And then if we're talking about season as an overall encompassing thing, Can we consider 10 games a season, or can we just consider like it's just like a kind of a half a season, right?
I don't know, man. Europe considers that a season.
Right. So, in my
Hey,
opinion,
we are next year
don't
too.
know. I don't know. It's tough. If we do want to put some like actual ramifications about it, I don't know if he actually technically qualifies. But if we do, just because of how sensational he did play when we had that short burst, you could put him in third team if you want. Personally, I don't think he makes the cut.
Go ahead, Nick James.
Yeah, so I chatted with Nick about this a little bit, and I don't know if I'm unique in this position, but for me, it was a decision whether or not I was voting M&S first or not putting him on my ballot. Because he did have a serious impact when he comes into C9, but it's half a season, and not all of those games look great. You know, we've got some Jace games at the end of the season that kind of look awful. And that plays into a little bit of this split being, in my opinion, a bit of a streaky mess throughout. You've got some teams that start out strong and then falter mid-split. You've got teams that completely blow up into the split. You've got Dignitas who's blown up from the start. And then you have a couple teams rallying back in those final weeks. And so it felt to me like press had to really put an emphasis on what they valued from these players in a split where people can be performing at entirely different levels. You know, comparing start, middle, and end. And so for me, it was a decision of do I include him or not. And like Nick, I just felt like I didn't have enough games to evaluate what his role was to C9 as much as I did for other mid laners for their teams.
That's wild because it just felt very, to me, and I guess also being influenced by the shows that I'm on, it felt very obvious that he was way more aggressive and created more pressure and attention that needed to be focused there either by the jungler or willing to 1v1 other mid laners. Like mid laners talk about, hey, what's the difference? Everyone can see us kind of well. And generally, you know how to team fight. But when you are able to start suffocating, how much do you suffocate your opposing mid laner in matchups that you're supposed to do that? And how much are you able to still siphon off in disadvantageous matchups? And it felt like M&S knew, hey, I can play Jace and I'm going to just constantly pressure the hell out of whoever's in front of me. Whether I'm 1, 2, 3 kills down, I will still make them play to make sure that their mechanics are good. Mechanics check. And that to me is reminiscent of last year JoJo. And I think worthy of a spot, but like everyone has touched on, wasn't as many games and clearly wasn't as consistent as Gory had been for Golden Guardians, which was my thought process there, which then left like, all right, well, who's left? I guess it was Vikla on how great that dominant that first half was. And it felt like kind of one of those things. I was like, is M&S better than Vikla? Yes. But Vikla was so damn good to the point where Cloud9 felt like they needed to make a change to their mid lane to compete with someone like that until he started falling off, right? And that was my thought process behind it. Sage and Feisal, any final thoughts here on this mid lane kind of voting conundrum that almost all of us hit this year?
Yeah, for sure. I'll go on some of my mid lane thoughts. So I don't think I had anything extremely controversial. The only one that I was thinking about was for that third. It was between, I put Vikla ended up being third, but it was between Vikla, Jojo Pyun, and Palafox for like that third spot. I took Jojo Pyun out because I felt like he had the tendency sometimes to just run it down a bit. And then I think there was also moments, honestly, towards the end, like I know it was stuff out of his control, but I felt the other two candidates towards the end were just a bit better. And then it came down between Vikla and Palafox for me. And then the reason why I went with Vikla over Palafox was I just felt that statistically and in laning wise, I felt that Vikla was just a little bit stronger than Pala. I must say, like his performance on Jace in that final game in playoffs, I thought was just really impressive. And if people saw, I could see why people would put Palafox as well into that top 3 voting. But like also Nick Geracie said, I think it's mid lane was such a weird position where aside from truthfully Gory, I think there wasn't really a set second or set third. And the only one that could be kind of set would be like Vikla is either 2 or 3 or M&S if you believe that 10 games was enough. For me, I personally feel that as long as you have half the split and your season is really impactful, I'd be happy to put you into like the second or third. I can't ever justify putting first for that reason. I think if you have at least half the split, you can get my vote for like second or third if you show like a lot of impact in the split.
Well, this works out great. Actually, David, you super sneaky reshuffled our conversation without telling us your votes, and you and Feisal are the two guys from the press that voted for M&S #1. So, Feisal, you first. Actually, Feisal, you already talked. David, you go first, and then Feisal, you can close it out.
Kind of relating back to what you said a little bit earlier, like going beyond the stats. I don't think there's a stat that tracks how many flashes you blew in lane just based off of your pressure, at least to my knowledge. And if you watched M&S play in the little bit of time that he did, he was exerting an insane amount of pressure in all scenarios. Even if it didn't lead to a CS lead for himself or an XP lead, it would snowball into objectives for other people or a gank for Blabber or something. Like, it was a night and day playstyle shift from when Diplex was in there. That was a direct result of him going in, and then obviously the team playing well around that. That, yes, there are always stats that can back that, but I think just eye test, it put him clear #1 for me. And I do value personally, I do count the extra game at the end of the season. I think if you've earned the tiebreaker, that is still regular season. That game arguably has more pressure on it, and to me adds more value than a normal regular season game. Oh, camera died. But I just think over the course of those 10 games, he did something that nobody else did. Because even Gory, whenever he was performing incredibly well in his 9 games, it was not the same level of influence across the game. I felt like it was a combination more, for Golden Guardians at least, of mid-jungle rather than just like mid straight up crushing people in lane.
Can I pose a question actually? Because everyone seems to be, when the people that have voted in first team all have pretty similar thoughts, and I think it's a great point, obviously, to bring that the change that that person played to their team raises their potential ceiling. Obviously, if it's an absolute obvious change, you have to recognize it. I just kind of want to ask though, similar to like what I mentioned before with my analogy, which it may not hit for everybody. Would that like 10 game sample size be enough for coaching staffs to be able to adjust to his particular style of play? Because even Rogue Warriors wins 5 games every now and again too, right? So like you can be like all out aggressiveness, but if you can't somehow calm the storm, and we saw it from last season too when COG had that 5 game split where they were on fire, and it took literally the entire season for people to figure out what they were doing in drafts that were getting them so far ahead after the first 10 minutes. So, like, do you feel like it might be like the onus on the coaches that just couldn't figure out what it was, particularly in the lane, that they were bothered with? Or do you feel like just because he was coming in with such a quick 10 game sample size that might be a little bit enough to deter, like, I guess, like the status quo, so to speak? Does that make any sense?
It does. Wouldn't it technically be a mix of both? Because by
Yeah,
his
that's what-
third
that's
week
what I'm
in,
more conflicted, yeah,
by his third week in, we all knew what was going to happen.
Right.
He's going to play aggressive in lane and do this, and you either stop him or you don't. Now, there's obviously a billion different strategies that you can have to go about that, but nobody did. And it wasn't until the last week with Jace that he finally had that fall off or return to grace a little bit. But even then, still was having an impact in games.
Right. It's like the best case scenario. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Like Sunday, right? Like was the MVP, and it was because he was just absolutely destroying people. Like the difference between his lane and his opposing lane was like night and day. But then they figured it out. They just banned his champions. Like, do you feel like maybe because if they get an idea of like what they're comfortable with to get that aggression in lane, if they start to ban his champions, would then that the fall off be too big? I don't know. That's kind of what I was grasping to figure out specifically what it was that I can evaluate for this player.
All right, Feisal, I've put you off for the longest time. Go ahead, close on out here with your M&S vote here.
I just think he was like head and shoulders above everyone else. Like from the start, that he had the aggressiveness in lane. He was able to make plays across the map. He was, as David said, there's no staff for it, but he was blowing flashes in lane. He was creating, I believe, a lot of the time he was creating his own leads. And I just didn't see anyone else really that was up to that level or was able to do that on a consistent basis over a span of weeks as he was able to. Yes, he fell off at the end of the split, but there was a long period of time where he was head and shoulders above everyone else. He had the aggressiveness that no one else could seemingly match, throughout the rest of the league, and there was almost nothing that he was went up against an Asol. He was Bjergsen. He was up against Yon. He smashed that lane. He was able to roam across the map. He made life hell, pardon my language, for 100 Thieves that game. And it was just those levels of performances were there that I just didn't see from anyone else in the mid lane pool. Just don't look at my second team.
Yeah,
Please. Just
we're working our way down. Was that who? I mean, don't worry, man. You are not Robert or Brian, who couldn't be with us. Brian with Nerd Street, Robert with Gamehouse. I voted Bjergsen first. So you're whatever you're done. I think you're absolved. That's actually. But while we're at it, let's take a peek. What did you vote for second team? You voted Balulu.
Yes, I told you don't look. If I could switch it, I'll switch my.
No, wait. No, don't backtrack yet. Tell me why you did that first, because this is gonna definitely make my little short form video, and then you can backtrack afterwards.
This clearly means that if you play a full split, you can only be third. You have to play like less than 18 games to be on Faisal's top two. Right? That's what I'm getting from this.
Okay.
7 games is enough.
Okay. When he came into Immortals, they turned into a team.
That's fair.
Like you can
team that still missed playoffs.
They still missed playoffs, but I say he came in and they actually started having plays and having win conditions with him in lane. First game comes to mind. This is Velkoz's game. He had there was a win condition. He had the champion pool that was wider, so it was easier for Immortals to play around him and a draft around his champion pool than it was for a Blaze Olive. And he kind of just made them play like a team.
Can someone remind me before he came to Immortals where Bolulu was? I think he was in TCL.
He was TCL.
He was
Yeah.
TCL, yeah.
Yes. So I will say, well, I did not vote him. I'm sorry, Feisal. I'm so sorry. I can see your points. I can see, as someone who has seen Bolulu's performance, I don't know if anyone watched, I think it was 2019 MSI when I believe he was on Supermassive, or I can't remember the team, but he dumpstered the play-in teams. Unfortunately, the TCL kind of fell off a cliff during the group stage at that year, but Bolulu was a big reason why they were able to make the upsets versus someone like Vietnam and end up qualifying for MSI. It was his performance, which is why I got excited when he was coming. Unfortunately, like I said, Immortals didn't click in enough time for Immortals to qualify themselves in playoffs.
I don't know, man.
That's kind of that's what it comes down to for me, though, right? It's like that. I think that I'm very much a big proponent of not that especially with MVP voting, that it shouldn't be, at least for my personal. I think I put a lot more emphasis on what someone brings to a team with the tools they have, how much of a difference they make, as opposed to just the best overall player. But I also think that has to be within reason. I actually think Jensen actually played pretty well, but did it help Dig win more than 3 games? No, it didn't. So I think there's simultaneously I had River as the front runner for my MVP until Golden Guardians lost 5 of their last 7 games. And I'm okay, I can't, no matter how much I thought he brought to the table in the good times, I can't justify that with the when GG finished 9-9. I mean, maybe if we can include the postseason, I can make that vote. But I do get what you're saying about Bolulu. I do think the team undeniably gained an extra gear. His Zoe single-handedly won them games. Velkoz won them a game or whatever it was. But I get where you're coming from. I just feel like there has to be a bit of a balance between okay, but how much did that actually make a difference in the grand scheme of things? So I don't think you need to backtrack and change it, because I do think there's some validity to what you're saying for sure.
Can I ask something about just placements in general? Because I feel like when it comes to individual performances, I feel as if there's a bit of a emphasis put on how well a team did when voting for people in All-Pro or MVP, compared to something like baseball, where a team can be 30th, but then they can still win MVP. I guess I want to ask, in 2017 spring, when Lyra won first All-Pro for NV, would you have put Lyra first place even though they only won for 4 games? Because I personally would have.
Yes.
I think I did too in the voting.
I didn't have
this because I didn't watch back then.
I did not have I did not have him as MVP. I did have him first All-Pro jungler, and if I recall correctly, he won. That's how good he was, actually.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, because MVP you do have to factor in that performance level. Like I couldn't justifiably vote for River on a 9-9 team when they were like 7-4. I was like, oh, if this keeps going, yeah, he's for sure to the moon, River MVP. But yeah, I think you know, for All Pro, I think that's what that's for. Was like you still have to be an MVP, you have to carry your team to a reasonable expectation. Like to the and you know, it's on a sliding scale. I think it's gray area. I think that it'd be very difficult for someone who maybe had a team that finished 5th or 6th to win MVP. But if the team was straight up like 10th, like 0-18 without them, it still could be a possibility. If all the other teams didn't have like particular standouts, they were just strong squads. Like if we had like 4 CLGs at the top, right, with like good players but no clear star, and then like a 5th place team that was just like some of those Bjergs and TSM games back in 2016 where it was just like 1v9. Like that's a situation where I think it could happen, but it's definitely hard, I think, unless you actually do have some success that the team had to back it up, like top 4 at least, I think.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me because I'm inverse. I think MVP is valuable, not best. And so like, what is the value they bring that's like wins against replacement? If you're talking baseball, what is the player behind him going to bring? Funny that you bring up the Lyra point. Sage, of course. You had to beat me flexing the historical knowledge. Dardoch had the most players of the games that season. It was 12 player of the games compared to 8 player of the games for Lyra. Obviously, Lyra would get less because they won less. But I found it just very interesting at that time that despite having those types of performances, Dardoch still didn't get the nod. You know, so
he was player of the game for the other team and all the losses that they had. That's why he had way less dimension. Like he either won or lost Immortals those games by himself.
I was gonna say he was on Immortals.
I mean, they also catered their game plan around him too.
yeah,
He was like their lone carry player. So even with the artificial feeding, a man still wasn't like that great.
Ooh.
Yeah, like for example, like Immortals in 2017 summer, what did they even do without Dardoch? Like, you know.
Was that the year they qualified for Worlds? No, that was when.
That was
That
with
was-
Smithy in summer,
yeah.
and they missed. That's what I mean. Is Dardoch individually looked awesome, but also like when things didn't go right, he was probably the reason they lost a lot of this game. They finished 7th, you know what I mean? And yeah, like you could say, oh, Envy finished in 10th, but I think Lyra did more with less and was more consistent in more losing situations than Dardoch.
All right,
If
so
you're talking about that specific example.
we
Fast forward to the present, right?
yeah, we've hit the mid lane jumble pretty well, and I think we've documented it how difficult it was either with no one other than Gory really stepping up and claiming it throughout the whole season. Everyone else, there's a pretty clear, you know, reason why, whether it was games played or form that kind of had a drop off. Other than the Bjergsen voters, I wish the Bjergsen voters could have been here and taken some of these questions, but you know, I digress. I think the other position that had a lot of conversation around, 2 positions that had a lot of conversation around it, were like your third team jungle, and then I guess who you picked at support, if it was Sven or Vulcan, right? People were like, hey, Berserker's the best AD carry or the second best AD carry. That to me seems like it goes hand in hand with Sven, but it seemed like a lot of people also voted for Vulcan as well. Nicholas James, how did you end up voting, and why?
For support specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for support, I had Sven first, and that one felt like, to me, C9's bot lane has just been like a huge part of how they play this split. You know, part of that's on Berserker, and I have Berserker quite high. But I saw a lot of praise for Sven, both from players on his team, and just eye test, just watching him play. It's not flashy, but I think he does a lot of the sort of thankless work for C9 in setting up a lot of their other players. Not that they have a shortage of players who can carry. So I had Sven first. Let me just make sure I've got this right. I have Sven first. Then I had Huhi second, and I think other people will touch on this, but Huhi, particularly in what it sounded like he was doing for Golden Guardians comms and their coordination, I really highly valued that. Golden Guardians, I think, outperformed a lot of people's expectations this split, and it seemed like Huhi was playing a pretty key role in that, and then both from what it sounded like he was doing for the communications. And then comes my third, which I think having had some time to sit on it. I think I snubbed Vulcan here. I was going over my vote late on the last night, trying to figure things out, and was drinking the red Kool-Aid a little bit. And it really seemed to me like 100 Thieves had found their form in those final weeks. Turns out it was just Rakan, but I did put Busio here because it felt like he had managed to pull back what it felt like a lack of identity. Sometimes we see this with younger sports with double lift, where it's all about just getting double lift goal. And I didn't see a ton from Busio early on that was convincing, but those last couple of weeks of like them switching to a very straightforward team fighting style, it seemed to me like they had found what was working for them. Clearly not. But yeah, those are my votes. And coming out of it, I do feel like Vulcan fell off at some point during that reevaluation of the support vote. And if I had a chance to go back, he's probably making it up there either in second or third. I'd have to think about it.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Appreciate your 100 Thieves support.
Yeah, I'll jump in for sure because I thought support was not as hard as mid lane, but definitely like I felt like it was pretty difficult personally. I actually had Vulcan first. I thought that he was the most consistent member of EG in a season that was very inconsistent for them. A lot of their mid games were just kind of like they could win or lose the game at any point, and oftentimes when they won, it was due to like clutch pick or like some really really well played engage or re-engage by Vulcan. And I agree with your points about Huhi, Nick. I think that I'll probably talk about this later if we get into it. But the stuff that he brings to Golden Guardians, like the intangibles outside of what he brings down the Rift, like that. If I included that, I'd put him first. But I was really trying to, for my votes, keep it strictly the player, because otherwise I would have every single split that High played League of Legends, he would have been my first All Pro and MVP every single split. Otherwise, I do agree that he brings a lot to the table outside. But as a support, I had him second. Third was really hard for me because I guess I'm in the minority. I thought that Sven was good. I don't think that he was great. I think it's easy to look just good when you have Berserker as your AD carry. I don't think he was poor by any means. I had him fourth on my lists. But in hindsight, maybe I should have had him third because I honestly had trouble with after Sven and Hui. Vulcan and Hui. I wasn't really sure who to put. Looking around at the other top teams, I mean, FlyQuest like swapped supports out, which made it hard to evaluate the same way that Cloud9 having two mid laners made it hard to evaluate too. So I went with I'm surprised I didn't get more flame for this, but I actually had Core JJ as my third vote. And I think that it's probably my most contentious pick. I do feel like throughout all of Team Liquid's struggles, he was clearly the person doing most of the things right and was doing the most with what he had. Some of those Nami games were a bit regrettable, but I also didn't think that the Lucian Nami was good for them as a team regardless. So support was really tough for me. So I'd love to hear what other people voted, or if they just were like, no, you should have put Sven, you idiot. Like if that's the answer, like then fine. But I had a lot of trouble after Vulcan, who I thought was good, and who obviously brought a lot to the table. It was tough for me to I felt like support got a little muddy because you had guys like Chime who didn't really have a good laning phase, was super great out of lane, but didn't really like lane well at all. So it felt like a lot of the support players had really defined strengths and weaknesses, which made it hard for me to evaluate them like on a well-rounded scale.
If I may jump in, as a support player in actual League, I'm not good at it, but I love the role. Support was actually the easiest for me. How they had it in the ballot, which was Vulcan, Sven, Huhi. That's how I ended up voting. But I completely agree. There were plenty of supports that definitely made an impact on it. I was debating, my last spot was between 4, which was Huhi, Busio, Chime, and I think I had Winsome, ? Even though from his first half. But obviously I had to, if I cut M&S from it, I had to cut the FlyQuest supports.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the support lane, it's always very difficult because, like you mentioned, we talked about Rakan. Rakan is a very difficult champion that requires a lot of synergy with your team. Players like Chime were able to do that well with the outside of lane engages. I definitely think of their week 8 when they swapped in Turtle. I saw there was a little bit of a click in there. But support's always very interesting to judge because there is just so much that relies on them in moments like that, whether it be a Thresh hook, a Nautilus hook. One imperfect wild growth can ruin the team if you're on the Zeri Lulu lanes. So it was a very difficult third, but I ended up just sticking just the way they have it. But any support, realistically, and just an unpopular opinion on my hand, any support can earn respects if they have some very good engages or clutch moments. But obviously, there will be some that do it better than others.
You know, funny enough, I just realized I was the only person that voted for Chime. So Chime got 1 point in this spring All-Pro vote, and it was me.
I almost voted for him, but I ended up not.
The other person that barely got any points other than Busio, because Busio got a couple of second place votes, was actually Dignitas support Ignar. Ignar picked up 2 points, and funny enough, it comes from Korean compatriots Rainover and Core JJ. But that also kind of speaks to our whole discussion about the thought process that maybe some coaches and players have towards all pro and how many games you need to play, because famously, I think this split, Ignar was the casualty of Core JJ's circumstance last year, right? Where that team, I personally think that Dignitas team looks very different if you have Ignar there. You know, I think Bio did a good job filling in, but Ignar is known to be someone who will stir things up and gank and shake things up for a team that looked like they needed a spark. You had the parts there, but you just needed a spark, and it'll be like, all right, Spawn Tomo, see you later. I'm going to top lane to get Armament going or to go gank squad with Santorin, but I digress. Other folks here on this support train votes here that haven't gone yet.
I'm not gonna lie. By all means, I love Busio. I think he's the future of the league, but I don't get what you guys saw this split to put him on top 3. Like, in my eyes, there's 3 types of games that you can have. There's a game where you are heavily impactful and can win it. There's a neutral game where you're along for the ride. You don't win it, but you don't lose it. And there's games where you lose it. And while Busio had those games at the end of the split, specifically the last 2 weeks where he was great on Recon and won those games, there were too many early on where he did lose lane. And it was positioning errors. The one game that really sticks out was his first Recon game where he played into Nautilus and just kept getting hooked over and over and over again. There were a lot of those games early on. The reason why Double Lift got my third All-Pro is because he had those games in the first 3 weeks where he was winning it for them. They cooled off in the middle and then came back strong. Busio never had that hot period. It was mild to arguably bad and then spiked up heavily. And that, if you're going to play all 18 games, I do value you growing over the course of that split. But that, I don't know, that's a little too jerk reaction for me.
He had the Azir game and playing the supports that were unorthodox to help kind of shake up that meta, and I think that excited a lot of people. But any Busio voters want to respond here?
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. Like, looking back on it, I don't think you're wrong. But coming out of those last couple weeks and I think I maybe put a little bit too much faith in them being able to play other engaged supports, and then playoffs comes and it's literally just Recon, and you ban that, and the lane looks just unforgivably bad.
He had one good Thresh game, and he had like 3 really bad Thresh games.
So, you know, 25%, not exactly great numbers. But no, I think David's right. Like, if I come at it now, I think Vulcan almost certainly makes his way in. But yeah, I was drinking the red Kool-Aid. I thought they had swapped back to, you know, good old fashioned LCS comp, weak side tank top laner, Double Lift and Bjergsen hoovering up the gold, and a support just playing engage champs for them. But I think, yeah, playoffs came, and it really showed that success for them was so narrow and very specific to so many elements of what they were playing at the time that more versatile and more experienced supports like Vulcan really should have gotten the nod.
We say that, but they were 1 minion away from being in the next series and Golden Guardians being at home.
Yeah, but 1 minion's enough, you know?
Yep.
I think we'll all look back on this conversation in a year, specifically the Busio stuff, and be like, ha 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 ha, because he's clearly destined to be much better than this. I think that it goes under the radar that, like, making an LCS debut is not easy. Making an LCS debut as double as support as a rookie is also not easy. And then he's also playing with Bjergsen. Like, you're part of the ultimate like reunion tour. Like, and I think that there's a lot of pressure, and I think that he handled it pretty admirably. He showed a lot of great composure, like post game interviews, win or loss, and I do think he has a bright future ahead of him, even if it didn't entirely come together outside of like some late spring recon games. I think that he's a bright future ahead of him.
Hey,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna
I
have
think
to
he's
step out
Biofrost 2.0.
right now, by the way.
May I
'cause-
ask a straight question for the chat?
Hold on a second, Jay. Are you leaving? Are you leaving fully, Sage?
Yeah, I have to leave.
right.
Before 7 right now.
Cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to hit on, like, or any points that you want to
Oh.
make? I was gonna ask at the very end, like, what's your one vote that, for next split prediction vote?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I want to hit on was just top lane, specifically, before I go, and then you could talk about that later. After Impact and Fudge. Oh, well, I did Fudge first, Impact second. I considered not even having a vote for a top for that third All Pro, but then the one I was landing on was between Revenge, Someday, and Dokla. I took Someday out just because I felt like he didn't bring as much compared to other two. And then I felt also people were going to vote for him a lot. So then it was between Dokla and Revenge. And the only reason I didn't put Dokla for third was because I felt his laning stats and just laning was just a bit rough. However, his team fighting is really solid. And 2023 summer, I could see him going into like second All Pro. I mean, if, I don't know with the whole situation, but like if they're all still playing, he does the same thing, I could see him moving up to second and like that. But that's my closing notes. Everything else is pretty boring on that part.
All right, thanks, Sage. Appreciate it.
Later, Sage.
All right, take care. Peace.
Go ahead, Jay.
Bro.
So sorry.
No worries. I just had a general question. I'm curious everyone's thoughts. When you have a younger player like a Bucio, or in the FlyQuest situation, when you had Ayla and Winsome, who are still younger in their careers, have the Superstar and Prince, it could just be any player, insert with Superstar player here. Do you think there's always a bit of pressure and a bit of stipulation and scrutiny if they fail to set that Superstar up for success? I feel like we often put a lot of pressure on younger players when they are on these Superstar lineups, and they're supposed to do really well. They're supposed to have the veterans to back them up, and then we criticize them when they don't do well. Do we think there's a little bit of pressure that we exert as voters, or is it something that's just like it's just a factor?
I personally think it's the opposite. Like when I was looking at the 100 Thieves roster, I didn't expect Bucio and Tenacity to be world beaters or even league beaters right away. I think pretty highly of Closer, but I think he's also a player who's like very dynamic dependent. And this is all to say why I actually had Deadlift on my third All Pro. I thought that he had like a really really impressive split. Yeah, the team played around him a lot, but that was kind of the way they could win, and he delivered every single time. And in the situations where that didn't work, more often than not, he was doing the most that he could. I think that Golden Guardians obviously did a great job in the playoffs of catching him out and stuff, but those were like well coordinated, well executed flanks, and there was also some positioning issues on other members of 100 Thieves. I think that if we're talking in context of voting, it's more so that I think sometimes these younger players get put in a position where their reputation's inflated. I think back to Biofrost's first split, where he was definitely good. Definitely a good player, good rookie split, nothing to be ashamed of. One rookie of the split, I believe, absolutely. He was also named #1 All-Pro on a TSM team that won 17-1, had an All-Pro in like almost every other role. And I think that it can almost be the opposite, where you can have a player on a team that is really, really good, and if they're like kind of what David said, playing that second mode, that hey, I'm not losing the game, I'm not winning the game, I'm just kind of along for the ride, that can actually kind of come back to bite you, and maybe things don't go as well, and all of a sudden you're the scapegoat when things go wrong, just because no one ever actually contextualized the value you were bringing. They just assumed you were a top support because you were on a top team. When if we're of the opinion that like value comes from what you can bring your team as an individual setting outside of, like in context of the tools you're working with. And how can it be that, like, it's kind of honestly why I had an issue with Blabber winning All Pro this spring. I mean, I don't think that he had a bad split, but like, I mean, with how good that we all saw, Berserker and Fudge be, and then M&S was essentially number one. Either thought he was number one, or we all kind of agreed that if he played 18 games, he probably would have been number one. That, like, how can all of these guys all be the best player in their role? Like, it doesn't that, I think that there's a little bit more, a little bit more gray area in that regard when it comes to voting and kind of putting a lot of stake in the results themselves as opposed to who and how contribute to those results.
Yeah, I'd say that to T1, man.
So there's an exception. I mean, that could be the exception, right? I mean, they like, but also like they're dropping, like, we didn't have a single team go 17-1 this split. And that roster's been, I feel like that is a loaded example, is what I'm going to say to you, sir.
I know. Okay. That's fine. Even though this is a roster that is also basically stuck together, that's fine, Nick. I don't feel like arguing that one. David, go ahead.
It's different.
You could also say the G2 roster as well last year that got all first team all pros, or this year I believe. I think
I didn't agree.
was
I didn't agree
team.
with that either.
They're united in rivalry. They're united in all pro. Like, it's all three of those teams, and then we just forget about Fnatic. Don't worry about
2020
that.
2020 C9 as well.
I don't think I've ever.
Oh boy, 2020
ever voted. I don't think I've ever voted for 5 players in the same team for All Pro. I do think that there have been certain splits in the past where it's been like, wow, this team was so much overwhelmingly better than everybody that they should have 3 or 4 for sure. Like, but it's just, yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of my general philosophy on voting. I think that can affect younger players who we don't actually know how to, like, contextualize yet, especially if they, like, start next to guys like Deadlift and Bjergsen, the 2 most decorated, successful LCS players in history. I think it's going to be hard to evaluate those players positively or negatively.
All right. Well, we're coming up on an hour here, and I got to roll after an hour. So we had, I think one role that we didn't touch on either that I think maybe has some place to discuss a little more is jungle. Sorry, Sage. I think top lane was pretty straightforward. Like,
Yeah.
anyone else? Top lane straightforward? Oh, that's pretty straightforward.
Top
There's 1, 2, and then
Fudge Impact.
Fudge,
Probably someday.
Fudge and Impact.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Fudge
yeah,
Impact, and then
probably
all of us
someday.
voted someday except Sage. He voted for Revenge.
I could have
Revenge
voted for 2
so-
firsts and no third. I would have. It was
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
close
yeah,
between
yeah.
Impact and
I mean,
Fudge.
I can see the revenge
Impact
vote, like,
and, Fudge.
easily.
I see it
I
too,
thought
but
Revenge-
like I thought Dokla over Revenge. Like,
Yeah.
Thought Revenge was a
Sorry.
top 5 top laner, but not a top 3 top laner.
Yeah,
I
I'd
thought
put him
Revenge had a
fifth.
very
I
good
could-
split, but yeah.
Yeah.
If I could vote Dokla for All Pro just off of that 2017 Yorick game, I would.
Oh
but,
my God.
Unfortunately, it's not quite allowed.
living in the past, like a lot of CLG fans. I'm gonna be
I
wearing my
still
CLG
remember
jersey
that
over
game.
in
I'm
Raleigh.
I'm a Yorick enjoyer. What can I say?
I see.
I feel that one.
All right.
I'm not a Yorick enjoyer.
Yeah.
You can trade that jersey in at the FlyQuest stand, by the way, before it's too late.
Oh
Jeez.
wow, hey man, I'm not the one that wore
Wow.
someone like you've already hurt CLG's feelings enough wearing 100 Thieves to the CLG watch party at Worlds, David. All right, so
That's
All
wild.
You-
love
you-
to
you-
Greg, but for the record, we got screwed by CLG for 3 years here in New York before he even stepped foot.
All
CLG can take their lashings a little bit.
all right. Well, okay, that's
taking a lot of them right now.
There's
That
a
is,
joke
I
you
was
made
gonna
there
say
somewhere.
that's not the first time there's controversy over wearing a 100 Thieves jersey, David.
all right. Let's close it on out here at jungle. Jungle role here. I think a lot of conversation around River and Spica and Blabber. I think those were the 3 leading candidates there. But that's not where we all ended up. 1, we didn't all end up the same order, and then 2, at third team, you had Closer kind of sneak up in there a little bit. I think someone voted Closer in second team. I think that was Brian as well, who also voted for Bjergsen at number 1.
Oh, Brian.
And then you had a contract signing. I love my boy Juanito. Inspired as well. Like, it felt like this jungle pool, although we had a clear like top 2, it felt like this was where the most talent has been in North America. Tim, let's have you start this one, brother. How would you have voted for this jungle pool?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of gave you the short end of the stick with no like actual contributions for picks.
Yeah.
So you can't really like pick on me for anything. But if I had a choice, my first team was Spica. I thought he was light. I thought he was head and shoulders better. Nick kind of alluded to it. Blabber, you know what I mean? He has that reputation of being the core identity for his team. He's kind of like the big main carry player that everyone wants to talk about, the franchise player, right? But Spica was just so much better. Team fights kind of like fostered around his ability to initiate. They kind of went around his ability to dictate the pace and tempo. And if you do that and you're a jungle player, I don't know, man. I feel like you're just the best player on your team. So for me, it was Spica, it was Blabber, and then it was River. And honestly, I was very conflicted. I went River number 2. But River kind of sucked at the end, so it's hard for me to be like, hey, you know what I mean? He was super good. I was like, maybe he's gonna run away. Nick kind of alluded to everything I was gonna say too. I was like, man, this guy's gonna be MVP, isn't it? Right? Jungle MVP is like my favorite.
Yeah.
It's such a hard position to just really have your impact shown. You're really like seen in the early game, and you're highlighted for it too, because like you're the guy who can get the ganks going. But then like I always want support to be highlighted too, because they have vision score to be like has to be heralded a little bit, right? But those are my 3. I don't think it's too controversial necessarily, but maybe the Blabber fans might like fight back.
Who else wants to jump in here next? I didn't get to look to see who had some spicy picks. Nick?
I will probably draw ire because I left Blabber out of my top 3, like I said 5 minutes ago.
What?
That's right. That's disgusting.
Yeah, no, he was so okay, and I
Should've started with him.
have. No, but I think I actually, I have less defense for the core JJ pick than I have this, and here's why. I think that Blabber, once M&S got on the roster, Blabber became a different player. He had a different gear, and I feel like you said, Tim, he's so much like he can, in a lot of ways, is the beating heart of the Cloud9 roster. But if you just have like a human heart, that's just like an organ. That's not like a whole person. I feel like Blabber oftentimes not necessarily has to be unlocked, but the way that the team plays around him, like really, really solidifies how good he is. Yes, in the second half, if it was a 9-game split, he's all pro jungler for sure. But I thought that he was not horrible in the first half, but definitely not the same player with Diplex. I think that another reason why it's so hard to evaluate him, and also by extension the same reason M&S, is that M&S kind of, I felt, had a role of like, he wasn't there to be the main carry of the team. That often fell to Blabber or Berserker. He was there to shut down the enemy mid laner and stop them. That's what, what David was saying, how much pressure he's putting out in lane. Yes, that is great work by him as an individual, but it's also because then it allows Blabber to kind of do whatever he wants. And that was huge. That's why I felt that Blabber had really, really high highs, but also was brought to that new height by bringing M&S in, by the team itself, like sort of transforming into having these defined roles, which makes them the best team for sure. But I thought that River did more with less. I agree with Tim. I thought Spica was the best jungler this split overall. Obviously, he had good teammates too, but I think it was also really hard to evaluate because we heard junglers talk all split long, especially in the first half, about how their role essentially doesn't matter and they're just a third summoner spell for bot lane. And they were very vocal about like, yeah, it's hard to show actually like who is the most skilled jungler. I had junglers straight up telling me they didn't know. Like I usually have an answer for you. I'm not sure. I think overall, based on consistency, results, and meta resiliency, I put Spica first, and then I've already sung River's praises a lot. He was my second. I couldn't keep. I had him first like the whole way, and then GG stumble at the end. And then third, I had Inspired because I actually think he was more consistent with than Blabber was on a team that definitely had more problems. But it's also very close, right? Like, I mean, I think like when I say like I had Inspired over Blabber, it was like it's close. So expect to get flamed for that, but I did have reasoning behind it. And also I think it's like I said, jungle was actually like in a weird way like the hardest role to evaluate in terms of actual jungle skill, as opposed to what people were accomplishing, because a lot of junglers thought, oh well, the best way to play the game right now is to just like be brain dead. And I think that made for a really interesting valuation of the roles, like significance in the competitive meta through spring.
Yeah, Nick, that
Egon, is there a way you can tell me who I voted for third pro? I'm forgetting.
Yeah, sure. I'm looking right now. Jay, you went Blabber, River, Spica, which
Okay, I did go Spica.
yeah,
It's like the exact same that I went.
yeah.
I do want to kind of go back to a little bit of River. I've been a fan of Rivers for a very long time. I remember when we first met River as a member of the PSG Talents. That 120, I think it was 2021 MSI. That was a lot of fun watching River. I've interviewed River a couple times, and it's always so much fun to chat with him. jungle was very hard. You're leaving out one former MVP in Inspired and another just very well-known jungler in Closer. I felt like it was a very difficult role as well. I think jungle and mid were the two hardest after like Spica or after Blabber and River. It was like, who's next?
I just can't believe River didn't make it to All Pro. Like, I think that's the most ridiculous thing. If he
That's
didn't get
mind-boggling to me.
if he didn't get second or second, fine. I had him second, but I'm like the fact that he didn't even get third, like that is crazy.
Yeah,
to me.
I'll
Like,
take
that's-
some fall for that. I'll take some fall for that for not submitting.
Okay, well, here's my question.
It's
on
all
that,
your
'cause
fault.
My bad.
This goes into what you said earlier, though. If you valued all 18 games of the split, and that's the reason why you didn't vote M&S in, so that longevity and consistency over the split holds weight. Why is Contracts not there? River had a great beginning of the split, fell off pretty hard afterwards. Contracts was that same. Yes, there were obviously ebbs and flows, but it stayed within a certain track all split, and eventually got them to third, off primarily the backs of Dokla, Palafox, and Contracts. Why would that not hold more weight than the flashy playmaking that falls off a cliff at the end when it matters?
I can
You're
answer
asking
that.
me? Yeah, you go.
Faisal's got it.
I just straight up forgot about CLG, to be honest, during voting. I didn't vote for any CLG members, and I felt horrible afterwards looking at the whole roster. I was like, oh, I forgot almost everyone. Like, I could, like, 100% I would have put Contracts over Spica, to be honest. Just based off of the cliff that FlyQuest as a team fell off of, and didn't seem like Spica had the same impact, or stayed consistent over the rest of the split. Contracts would have easily put over Spica, but yeah, I just kind of dropped the ball with CLG.
Okay, follow-up question then, directly on that, because I'm preempting the Reddit comment and Twitter reply that's going to come in. What response would you have to those that are going to say, we are media, it is part of our job to know that every person is here and to recognize that and not forget, to thoroughly examine that? What would the response be? Because you know it's coming.
Yeah. I off the top of my head, I had to think about that for a second. I don't know why, honestly. There's just nothing that really stood out to me about CLG's players. Like, they were all really consistent over the league. Like, I saw them as, like I said, for Luger, like kind of the median. The one I could, like, Dokla is the one that was like close to me for third team, but I didn't put him third team. I put him someday. Palafox, my mid, I dropped the ball in mid. Oh my god. But no, jungle, just CLG just did. Saw him as like maybe the players like the fourth in the hierarchy of where I rated the players, or fifth in the case of Luger. I just didn't see them as like the top three in their role.
Yeah,
Faisal,
man.
can I defend Feisal for a sec?
Go for it.
Go for it.
Yeah. I feel like because we're journalists, right? Obviously, that's first and foremost. But secondly, we're also fans, right? If you're just not gonna be impressive and you just don't show out, like, what's my reason to care?
I'm not saying there's a reason to care, but there's also a reason for you to provide why somebody shouldn't get it. As much as there's a reason to provide why somebody should, you have to be able to provide the counter for that.
I actually have one, if that's okay. I mean, sorry, Tim, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
My apologies.
That was the just tone right there.
I mean, I actually think, like, I get what you're saying about Contracts. I do think that yeah, obviously had some incredible early games, and definitely was a big factor in CLG getting to where they were. I also saw a lot of early games where he pressed too hard and kind of threw an advantage that he had, or took them out of the game. And I also think that there's actually been a lot of talk about this in general, about how did no one from CLG get an all-pro vote if they finished third place. And I know a lot of people see that as kind of a snub, but I actually see it, honest to God, as like a compliment to what they've built. I think CLG's greatest strength is that they've always been greater than the sum of their parts. Yeah, Luger is a pretty reliable carry, but yeah, I didn't have him in the top three. I mean, clearly it's debatable that he could be, but you know, no one's going to put him like up there with like on Prince or Berserker's level. Contracts had some really strong early games. Like I said, I think he also had some, you know, blunders in the early games, and I think that between you know what CLG put together from their front office to how they've developed it through their robust coaching staff, and I do think that truly their greatest strength is that they all are on the same page, like more than a lot of teams. Like there were teams that were like better than them, who had worse synergy. And maybe CLG can't compete with those teams in terms of sheer firepower, but I actually thought it was kind of poetic that they finished in third with no players in the top three. I think that actually speaks to like their intrinsic strength as a unit. And it's just because I think when you look at each individual player, they have enough weaknesses where I can't justify them as a top three spot. But the team as a whole clearly has something. I know they finished in fifth in the playoffs, but the team as a whole still, like you said, finished in third. Clearly has something figured out. But because it was such more of like a team effort, I felt like I couldn't put contracts in the same way. Where I did feel like I definitely could put Doublelift in, because I felt like if Doublelift, yes, he was relied upon to carry, had all the resources going to him, but if he doesn't deliver on that, 100 Thieves don't make playoffs probably. So that was kind of my reasoning specifically regarding the contracts thing and just CLG players in general. Actually,
they were fourth, by the way, guys.
Yeah,
right?
I was gonna say at the expense of poor Numi's taste.
Oh, I'm
buds.
sorry, but
All
sorry,
right,
yes.
her taste buds. Oh,
Yeah.
God.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
Okay,
but
they
the
were
point
tiebreakers.
still the point still remains that at the tiebreaker for third, that was them. They got to that point, and it's just kind of crazy that all their players still don't get any nods and weren't necessarily close either. Like for me, I think for everyone that hasn't been following contracts as closely as I watch him, it was a higher floor contracts and a higher, I'd probably still say the same ceiling where he could be the best player in the league, but there were still games where he wasn't reaching that same potential. And I think it's very different when you've shown you can be the best player in the league, a la Inspired and Blabber and Spica, and then you've shown that you have the potential to be, you have flashes of it, but you haven't been able to put it all together. That's where my boy is. That's where Juanito is for now. And it's almost all of them except Poom. I don't think Poom's that good, but like Dokla is probably the most consistent out of all of them, right? Yeah. Palafox had some game, like he had again same kind of thing where his floor is a lot higher. There's way more respect being spoken on his name now than at the beginning of the year. But there were also some games where the eggs were in his basket and they weren't able to do it. And then people quickly figured out the Aurelian Soul basket, and he wasn't able to push through that either. So I think if anyone was the closest, it would be Dokla at third. But the weakest pool, in my opinion, was mid lane, where Palafox probably comes fourth, maybe fifth as your mid laners.
Yeah, it's also like what it looks like when it comes together, when it doesn't come together. When River doesn't fully succeed in carrying an early game for CLG, like he doesn't have as much impact, but it's not necessarily like he's not creating like a detriment. Whereas there were certain CLG games where like contracts just 0-3 at 10 minutes because the coin landed tails 3 times. And I think that's not like he's not a full coin flip player, but I do think that's still part of what makes him good and also what makes him bad. So I do think that's important to contextualize as well.
All right, guys. Yeah. Closing thoughts here as I need to get going, but again, our first time kind of coming together and putting a face behind the votes, and also the fantastic articles and insights that you all have provided for this season and the split and last year, and for some of you for years now. Any closing thoughts to knock out this LCS spring all-pro voting?
Yeah, I want to add one thing. One of the biggest criticisms I've seen of media is just remember that we are all human. We all make mistakes. There have been years where I've left people out. I work full-time in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. There are moments where I have definitely forgotten someone or maybe made a mistaken error and was like, I forgot to swap this quickly. So if we deserve the flame, we deserve the flame. But do remember at the same time, we do try our best. We try to provide the best coverage that we can. But we're human. We will make mistakes. And we hope that we are able to answer some of the questions that some people may have asked us. And hopefully, if you see us in Raleigh, I know some of us will be going to Raleigh. If not, just see our work throughout it. Just say hello to us. We don't bite. We're nice people, I think. I'm not. I'm kidding. I am. But yeah, I was gonna say
Egon's a jerk.
Yeah,
it's me.
I heard people were intimidated by Nick's beard.
I voted wrong once when I was in the LCS in summer 2017. Accidentally put Svenskeren twice. Somehow no one caught it. I meant to put Xmithy. Everyone voted Xmithy. I was voting Xmithy. But, you know, it happens.
Actually, that Ben was pretty fucking good, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Third team All-Pro
was
behind my boy Shrimp. I think I had
Yeah,
Shrimp there
good.
at number 2.
Pretty good.
I forgot that Shrimp. I feel bad, but I forgot Shrimp was a player and how good that Dignitas roster was.
Yeah.
Shrimp reference. Love to see it.
Anyone else? Closing thoughts?
Yeah. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Faisal, go.
Okay.
Yeah, Faisal, go. Yeah.
I think the biggest snub, personally, to me, was Stixay not making All-Pro at all. I had him as my 3rd team All-Pro, and he just wasn't there. I know like Double F had his resurgence. That's where a lot of the 3rd team All-Pro votes went. I still went Stixay. But yeah, what David said, a lot of us, well, some of us have second jobs as well. I'm getting ready to go back to school as well in September, so I have like 3 things taking up my attention. So yeah, we're going to make mistakes. But we are passionate about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Like, we wouldn't be watching League. We wouldn't be covering it. We wouldn't be trying to bring stories to the fans. We would try to be asking questions that the fans want to have the players asked, and like bringing that to them and bringing the results to the fans themselves. But we are passionate about it. But we do make mistakes. We do have sometimes our attention goes in other directions, so we make mistakes, or we aren't paying full attention to one specific thing. But yeah, we're passionate about it. We do care about it. We do feel a responsibility at least I do, a responsibility to bring the best product forward from us. It's just that sometimes we're just not able to focus fully on maybe one aspect of it because we have something else taking up our attention.
All right. Nick James, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was just to sort of piggyback on what Jay was saying. I know I'd been chatting with Nick before All-Pro and a little bit afterwards. I'd mentioned, people seem really vocal about All-Pro this year. And Nick said, yeah, that's a good thing. And I've come around to being on that point. I would rather that some people be a little bit riled up by what we vote because they care about the league and they care about the stories being told around it than not caring. And if we have to get a couple question mark pings every now and again because of the way we voted, but that means people are engaged with the LCS and care about the players and care about the stories they're in, I'll take it. I'm looking forward to being back next split.
Yeah, I'm only gonna speak for myself here, but I've never made a mistake.
There we go.
Core JJ is
Mistakes, yeah.
he's still better. Core JJ is still better than your favorite support, even though Team Liquid finished in 8th. Jokes aside, I mean, yeah, like I would prefer if someone has a problem with my votes or thinks like I'm completely off base, like I'm willing to be proven wrong, and I think it's good that people have these opinions on our votes and are questioning our validity as the voting panel. That's like you said, like we all have a lot of stuff going on, but I think it ultimately is our responsibility. And I think that, yeah, obviously, like there's a line to everything. Like you said, Jay, like we're all human. I already can point to like 2 mistakes on my ballot that like, and not because I don't think I was not paying attention, but just because like it's a best of 1 series. We finished on a super week with like 15 tiebreakers. It felt like I think there's going to be at least 1 or 2 votes for maybe I did undervalue what this person brought throughout and let my recency bias affect me. Like there's definitely going to be imperfections, but I also hope that that there's no intimidation when it comes to like if you have like I can't speak for everybody. If anyone has an issue with my votes or wants to talk to me on my votes, I'd be very very happy about that. I'm glad that people care. I'm glad that people want to start a discussion about that. So I hope that it continues with civility and as much respect as we can give one another, of course.
David, you want to close this out?
Echoing that sentiment. If anybody ever wants to talk about the stuff, all of us are available on social media. Reach out to us. We're more than happy to say anything. If you're specifically in New York City, don't tweet at me. Don't post in the comments. Come to our watch parties, including our watch party here for finals at OSNYC this Sunday for Cloud9 versus likely Golden Guardians. You get a little bit of tequila in me, and believe me, I will not shut up about All-Pro or anything you want to talk about. So let's talk about it in person and support the LCS. We don't need MSG to do it. We can do it ourselves.
Yeah, he's not
Yes,
lying.
sir.
He won't shut up. All right,
And
everyone.
if
If you're in Raleigh, come say hi. Again, wanted to say thanks to all of our media partners here that took the time out and, showing face. Again, a lot of people were like, I'm not super familiar with them. I was like, yes, you've seen their stuff before. You've read their stuff before. Jay Silver, David Shynock, Nick Geracie, Feisal Merali, Nicholas James, Sage Datuin, Tim Lee, and Robert from the Game House was going to be here and didn't quite work out. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you, wherever you're going to end up watching the finals, have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks. All right.